This is a quick kind of overview of different types of business entities and the way those business entities can work when it comes to liability, taxation, management, types of people that are involved in it, so on and so forth. This, if you are listening to it in podcast form, I will have the show notes, which includes the text that I'm using to show this table here. That I'm working off of. I do want to note, regardless of whether you're on YouTube or on a podcast platform, that I am neither a CPA nor an attorney. I am talking to you from my general knowledge and experience on the matter and how this could affect you and your businesses as you move forward. If for any reason you feel like you want to address these, please talk to an attorney or CPA on how these are going to affect you in a very specific situation. But my plan here is to talk about each type of corporation or business style and offer, when I have them, different backgrounds to where I could potentially, where I've seen things go, especially when it comes to liability. So I'll just go down the list here and then I'll tell you from my position the order of operations or the order of what I would think would be the best set of um, the best way for the businesses to be ordered as far as those things. I specifically look at taxation, liability, and management. Those three are going to be my major criteria. So the first one on this particular table is C Corps. C Corps are by far my favorite one. Yeah, they're a little more expensive to start. However, um, they provide some of the best liability coverage or separation of liability between you and you as an individual. So you have your business entity, and then separately you have you. Um, Other types of businesses don't flow through quite as well as this. They're not as cut and dry as we may think they are, and therefore there could be issues in the case that we were sued, essentially. While there can be an unlimited number of shareholders, you can have as little as one shareholder when it comes to corporations. So you don't have to go, okay, I have to have X number of corporation or X number of shareholders, so long as you have more control than anybody else. And that might be that you have 51% as someone else's 49%. You have control over said corporation. While it is more expensive, while you have to have articles of incorporation and bylaws and you need to have meetings, you only have to have one member meeting and a year. And I don't remember, I think you can have other meetings up to like 13 times a year, but many people just have them once a month or once a quarter, and they can literally be you and your three other shareholders who also happen to be your board of directors sitting for coffee together and you guys discussing the things and then somebody taking minutes, specifically the secretary. While you do not have to have a whole bunch of shareholders or board members. Typically, in Oregon, at least, you have to have three board members. You need to have at least the director or the president and the secretary. Ideally, you're going to have someone who knows finances be your treasurer as well. But there is not, it doesn't have to be as complicated as it was as what some people make it. Your board of directors can work as a group during your monthly meetings to take stuff forward. They can also choose, you being the person who's running the business, for you to take that management. But it really doesn't have to be hundreds of people. You don't have to publicly issue stocks or anything like that. You can have private corporations where only one or two people or fewer or more own said business. Along with that is taxes. So in the state of Oregon, there's a $150 corporation registration fee that's due every single year. Um, so long as that corporation is not making income, and that might be because that corporation is investing back in itself or paying back its debts, and those debts can be to you, that corporation is not going to pay any federal taxes because there's no income in the bottom line of their income statement. The only way you personally would be taxed is if you were A, an employee, or B, getting dividends from this corporation, hence the double taxation. So, in a great grand world, our business is making money, has paid off all of its debts or a chunk of its debts, and then also is giving you a dividend. Um, it will do two things. It will pay taxes, its own income tax, and then you will pay taxes on that dividend. You don't pay taxes on reimbursements. Okay. Reimbursements are money that you lent to the corporation. Now the corporation is giving back to you. So it's your own money. The difference between C corps and S corps. C corps have unlimited number of shareholders allowed. S corps are down to 100. But again, you can have as few as one shareholder if you want to. The idea with S corps is that it removes the double taxation. The issue, in my personal opinion, with S corps is that you are personally responsible as the shareholder for the corporation's taxes. So what that can do is that can raise your tax bracket from whatever you're making as a W-2 employee plus whatever the corporation is making to how much income are you actually liable for. You still have to have articles of corporation and bylaws, and you still have to talk to you still have to pay that $150 to the state. Um, you limit liability with the S corp just like you do with the C corp, in that it's more separated, in that it's its own entity. But this is where we can start getting muddled because we can start crossing in our personal stuff with our business stuff, and I'll talk about that more here in just a second. So sole proprietors, single owner, in an ideal world, you pay the $50 for 2 years to get a doing business as or DBA in Oregon, but you don't even have to do that necessarily. It goes right onto your personal taxes. You have utter and full responsibility and liability for this. If anything goes wrong, the person sues you, the person sues your business, it's all the same thing. You pay the taxes, but it is nice in that it's the cheapest way to start a business. Super fast, super easy. Um, so with businesses with really little liability, these are great options. For example, Etsy shops, places where you're not uh, in a situation where something can happen. The one trick here, however, is that if you're running a business out of your home, you need to look at insurance. And the reason you need to look at your insurance is because if you go, I have homeowners insurance or renters insurance, and therefore that's going to cover my business stuff, that's not always the case. You have to look at your individual insurance policy. And see if that's something that they'll do or if they'll put it on as a rider, especially if for some reason you are bringing someone else's owned product, owned thing into your space. You're a tailor, you're making repairs on saddles, you're making repairs on cars, whatever that, where you're taking something that someone else owns and bringing it into your personal space. If anything happens, you get a fire, you have another natural disaster, you have a robbery, you have something like that where that person's item could then be injured. You could be personally liable for that because your insurance won't cover it. General partnerships and limited partnerships, I rarely see personally. So I have a lot less practical experience with both of these. What I tend to see, however, is the general partnerships are going to have more personal liability than the limited partnerships. And what tends to happen in both of these situations is I suggest that someone either be an LLC with more than one board member, or excuse me, more than one member owner, or be in a corporation, because the partnerships are really, really hard to get out of if something were to happen between you and your partner, and trying to buy out, depending on how you guys have structured things and stuff like that. A lot of these businesses, in my personal experience, have just gone completely by the wayside, even if they're really good businesses, because there's not a good way to get the one partner who wants to leave or needs to leave out of the situation. Um, and it's a little easier to do with an LLC or a corporation. With a limited liability corporation, these are the next least expensive to get started. You just have to file a little bit of paperwork, at least in Oregon, and then you are going to have a you are going to have a registered name with the state. You do need to file some articles of incorporation and an operating agreement, and that has to be updated annually. But those are not complicated documents to get a hold of. A limited liability corporation can be a single member liability corporation. It can be multiple members, but it does not have to be multiple members. So if you want a little more liability coverage between a sole proprietorship, moving from a sole proprietorship, moving to a limited liability company is a better choice. And then I suggest people move up from there to a corporation. The trick with limited liability corporations, if you mix business and pleasure, so your personal anything and your business anything mixed together, a good attorney is going to go, the veil of discrepancy between business and personal doesn't exist anymore. And therefore, they're going to sue you and they're going to sue the company. So, and they're going to have grounds to do so. So, for example, somebody pays you for a service and you put it in your personal bank account. Then you move money from your personal bank account to your business bank account so you can spend stuff on expenses. Or you buy things at the grocery store that you need for your business, but part of those are your groceries for your personal stuff, and part of those are your groceries or your cleaning chemicals or whatever you need for your business. Now you're crossing the line and you're making those lines super hazy. So I've seen this happen where something happens with somebody who's like, I have a limited liability corporation. I'm not liable for anything. And where it becomes an issue is that the person has blurred that line so much that the limited liability corporation is essentially being um, it's rendered useless essentially, and the attorney can go, well, they've been doing personal stuff with their business card and business stuff with their personal card, and it just doesn't help at all. It ends up hurting you a lot more. So if you're going to have a limited liability corporation, your business stuff and your personal stuff has to be 100% separated. Okay, the only way you can have crossover is if you're like, I'm taking a draw from my corporation, from my company, and I'm going to move it from my company account to myself. That is all. Okay. Anything else, do not buy groceries with your business card. Do not buy do not go on vacation with your business card because there's more money in that. Do not buy uniforms with with your personal card that's really for your business. The more you mix that, the harder that line is. So the way this is taxed is it's a Schedule K on your personal finances. So the LLC's taxes are generally due if you have an end of year fiscal year, generally due March 15th. And then the Schedule K is reported onto your personal taxes when you turn those in on April 15th or whatever tax day is that year. So if you have more than one partner, everyone has to have that Schedule K on there. All right. So, oops, what tends to happen is that we rely too heavily on what we think an LLC does, and then we don't create good lines in our business. However, if the choice is LLC as sole proprietor, and there is any way that someone in your business, so some patron of your business could get hurt. You have a restaurant, you have a storefront, you have um, something like that where someone could walk in and slip and fall. Somebody could get burned, somebody could get cut. Um, Absolutely 100% go with an LLC if you're looking at just between an LLC and a sole proprietorship, because a sole proprietorship guarantees that if someone were to sue your business, they're suing you, you could lose everything that you have. LLC used correctly is going to protect you from that. Okay. My personal order and the way that I would be doing these is I would be doing a LLC or corporation, C Corp specifically first. One of those two. If you can afford the C Corp, do the C Corp. That's going to create the most separation. If you can't, go with an LLC until you have the money to get a C Corp. From there, do an S Corp. I don't like the flow through tax situation, um, but that is another good option, especially if you have very few shareholders and everyone who is a shareholder is actually paying their taxes. Because if they're not paying their taxes, you could be responsible for paying other people's taxes because the corporation still owes taxes. So something to be thoughtful about there. From there, sole proprietorships, but only in very limited situations where the liability of what's happening is very, 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 very small. Typically, something like an e-commerce business where you own something and until you ship it out, it is yours. So I make jewelry. That jewelry is mine. The person buys it online. It is mine until I put it in the post office. Then it's on the way to being theirs. That's an okay place for sole proprietorship. General partnerships and limited liability partnerships, I put very dead last on this list and strongly encourage someone to use either a corporation or an LLC if you were thinking about these two because they are easier to manage. So, wow, we can get scared by things like a double taxation on corporate taxes or the cost of starting a corporation. It should not discourage you from limiting the liability that can be produced by choosing a different business type, even if you're choosing that business type in the short term to then work up to a corporation. They tend to get a bad rap because people are like, I don't want to be double taxed. Well, you're not necessarily being double taxed depending on how things are happening in your business, and you need to talk to a CPA for that. And you're not going to get pushed out of your own business, especially if you always maintain a majority ownership of said business. Okay. Last but not least, if there's any time that there's a situation where you are performing stuff, performing a service, or teaching someone something with their body or with a sport or something like that, a release of liability is always a solid choice. Also, if something is coming into your personal space that's owned by someone else. Have an attorney help you draft it. And a release of liability is basically saying, hey, you understand that there's an inherent risk when you are doing business with me in XYZ capacity, and that you are not going to hold me personally responsible if something were to happen to you, your body, your child, your item, whatever that may be. Those are not 100% foolproof, but that's another layer that you can put in between you and the person if something were to happen and you were to get sued for any reason. So when I used to give horseback riding lessons, Oregon has what they call an inherent risk loss. So I have it posted before someone even comes through the gate to my barnyard that this is an equine facility. And if you step foot on here, you are considered a participant and you have inherited the risk of being around large animals that could hurt you. Secondarily to that, they have to sign a release. I don't do horseback riding lessons anymore, but they had to sign a release of liability, understanding that you were getting on my horse on my property. And while I am doing my very best to make sure that you don't get hurt, sometimes if you ride long enough, you will get hurt. And that you were not going to hold me personally responsible if you or your child gets hurt, especially when I didn't allow anybody on any of my animals or near my animals without boots, near my animals, or on my animals without a helmet. So doing things to reduce and mitigate said risk. Another example of that might be if you have a mechanic shop in your backyard, but you live in kind of a sketchy area of town, maybe you're going to do your due diligence to make sure somebody's car or catalytic converter or whatever is not being stolen. But if that happens, there's not a complete responsibility on you. So you might be doing things like keeping gates closed, locking things up at night, but there's always this risk that that's a potential of something that could happen. And therefore, if it does, they are to go to their car insurance for replacement, not to sue you personally. So those are just my generalized thoughts on different business entities and how they could or could not work in your favor. I'm not 100% right. I'm just telling you what I've personally seen. And ultimately, the choice is up to you, your attorney, and your CPA.